The last time you were really sick, someone probably brought you something: soup, a glass of water, a hand on your forehead, and "you'll be okay." Maybe you barely noticed. Maybe you were too busy at 3 a.m. asking WebMD whether a headache means a brain tumor. But here's a question you've never asked. When did humans start doing that? Sitting beside the sick, refusing to leave? The answer is older than medicine, older than farming, older, honestly, than us. Because for most of our 300,000 years, none of the stuff you reach for existed. No Tylenol, no antibiotics, no urgent care, no thermometer, no Google to misdiagnose yourself with at 3 in the morning. When your body turned on you, there was no name for it, and no pill to fix it. There was just pain, fever, and the people around you. And yet, somehow, people survived. Not all of them. But enough to raise children, build communities, and eventually invent the very hospitals you take for granted. So what did they do? When did the instinct to care for a sick human actually begin? Before we answer when, we have to kill an assumption you didn't even know you were carrying. Here's the assumption. We've all absorbed a version of survival of the fittest, the idea that nature is a meat grinder, that the weak get left behind, that prehistory was every caveman for himself. It's tidy, it's cold, and when it comes to the sick, it's mostly wrong. Because think about what illness actually does. It makes you useless, temporarily. You can't hunt, you can't gather, you can't keep up when the group picks up and moves to the next valley. And in a world with no surplus, no fridge, no safety net, every mouth that can't contribute is a genuine risk to everyone else. In a truly ruthless world, a person like that is dead weight, and dead weight gets left in the dust. That's the cold math the survival of the fittest story predicts. So if that story were true, the archaeological record should be full of people who got hurt or sick and then died, fast. Clean Darwinian math. Instead, we keep finding the opposite. We find skeletons of people who were badly broken, and then kept living, for years. People who, on their own, could not possibly have survived. Here's the thing nobody tells you about archaeology. A healed bone is a love letter. A broken leg that knitted back together means someone protected that person while they couldn't walk. A survivor who couldn't feed themselves means someone did the feeding. The strongest evidence for ancient compassion isn't a fancy tool or a temple. It's an injury that should have been a death sentence and wasn't. And the oldest love letter we've ever found is older than our entire species. Travel back about 45,000 years to a cave called Shanidar in the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq. In the 1950s and 60s, an archaeologist named Ralph Selecki excavated a series of skeletons there. One of them, known as Shanidar I, nicknamed Nandy, is one of the most quietly astonishing humans ever found. Except he wasn't human, not like you. He was a Neanderthal. And his body is a catalogue of catastrophe. He was blind in his left eye, from a crushing blow to the side of his face. His right arm was withered and ended above the wrist, possibly amputated, possibly just useless his whole adult life. He was likely deaf in one ear. He had degenerative damage in his legs. Any one of those, in the wild, alone, is a slow death. Nandy lived to somewhere around 40 or 50, which, for a Neanderthal, is old. He grew old while falling apart. Let that land. A Neanderthal, yes, the guy your insults are named after, the supposed brute, survived a stack of disabilities that should have killed him many times over. And survival here wasn't passive. Think about what it actually takes. With one working arm and one working eye, he couldn't have hunted, couldn't have effectively defended himself, probably couldn't have prepared his own food. So for years, somebody saw to it that he didn't starve. Somebody shared the kill. Somebody kept him with the group when the group packed up and moved. When every cold, practical instinct said leave him. That's not a tool you can hold in your hand. That's a decision, made over and over, by people we've been told didn't have the capacity for it. Now the careful scientist in the room says, one cave, one skeleton. Maybe it's a fluke. Fair. So let's check. Because it isn't a fluke. It keeps happening, on different continents, across thousands of years. In Calabria, in southern Italy, there's a burial called Romito II, a teenager who lived around 10,000 years ago with a form of dwarfism that would have made it nearly impossible to keep up with a mobile, hunting and gathering band. He survived to adolescence anyway. Somebody slowed down for him. And in Vietnam, At a Neolithic site called Manbach, there's Burial 9, a young man paralyzed from a condition in his spine, likely from his teens. He lived roughly another 10 years, completely dependent on others to feed him, clean him, turn him so his skin didn't break down. Italy, Iraq, Vietnam. Different millennia, different species, same stubborn answer. Somebody stayed. That last case, Manbach Burial 9, became the foundation for an idea big enough to deserve its own name. The researcher Lorna Tilley, working with Mark Oxenham at the Australian National University, built an entire method around it. They call it the bioarchaeology of care. The logic is beautifully simple. If you find a skeleton that survived a condition the person could not have survived on their own, couldn't feed themselves, couldn't move, couldn't fight off the elements, then the bones themselves are evidence. Not of a tool, not of a belief, of an action. Somebody provided direct, sustained, day-after-day care. Tilley basically turned a skeleton into a witness statement. And it's rigorous, not romantic. The approach works in stages. First, you diagnose what was actually wrong with the person. Then you ask what that condition would have done to them in their specific world. Could they walk, eat, stay warm, survive a winter? And only then do you reconstruct what level of care must have been provided for them to live as long as they did. It forces you to rule out the easy explanations before you're allowed to land on the human one. That's the difference between a nice story and a finding. It's not just broken bodies either. There's Ötzi, the 5,300-year-old Iceman, frozen in the Alps. His body carries dozens of tattoos clustered on joints and his lower back, lining up suspiciously well with spots that would have ached, possibly an early form of therapeutic treatment. He was also carrying birch fungus, which researchers think may have been used against intestinal parasites. Even alone on a mountain, he was caring for the one patient he always had, himself. Now, let's be honest, because honesty is what makes this credible. Could some of these survivors just have not died yet? Could we be reading kindness into coincidence? It's a fair challenge, and the answer is in the bones. The injuries healed. Bone grew back. These people lived for years, not days. That rules out luck. And where we're not sure, we say so. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. I'm also not selling you a fairy tale where prehistory was gentle. It wasn't. Most sick people still died. There was no anesthesia, no understanding, plenty of suffering. The point isn't that they always succeeded. The point is that they tried. So, when did caring for the sick begin? Earlier than farming, earlier than writing, earlier than your species. But here's the part that actually matters. Because it turns out the care wasn't just sentimental. It was, in a very literal sense, working. Start with the obvious branch. At some point, sitting beside the sick turned into experimenting on the sick. In a good way. People noticed that certain plants did certain things. Willow bark, for one, brought fevers and pain down. We know this is ancient because it shows up in Egyptian medical writing. The Ebers Papyrus, around 1550 BCE. Willow bark contains salicin, which your body converts into salicylic acid, the direct chemical ancestor of aspirin. They had no idea why it worked. They just knew it did, remembered it, and passed it down. The molecule in your medicine cabinet is the same one they were chewing on thousands of years ago. And this is the part people underrate, that knowledge was never written down for most of history. It was carried, mother to daughter, healer to apprentice, one careful observation at a time. Someone had to notice that this bark helped, and that berry killed, remember it, and trust it to the next generation. Caring for the sick wasn't just an act of kindness. It was humanity's first research program, run for tens of thousands of years with no lab, no journals, and no funding, just memory and stubbornness. But the deeper branch is stranger, because even when the plants did nothing, even when there was no cure to give, the present still mattered. In 1955, an anesthesiologist named Henry Beecher published a paper called The Powerful Placebo, putting hard numbers on something humans had been doing forever. The belief that you're being cared for produces real, measurable changes in the body. Lower stress hormones, reduced pain, genuine physiological shifts, not imaginary ones. To be clear, a placebo won't set a bone or kill an infection. There are hard limits, and pretending otherwise is how people get hurt. But the feeling of not being alone with your suffering, that moves the needle. Measurably. Let that sit for a second. Being cared for is, measurably, a kind of drug. which means that 45,000 years ago, when someone sat next to Nandy in that cave and simply stayed, they were running chemistry we wouldn't be able to name for another 49,000 years. Healing was never only the cure. The hand on the shoulder was doing real work. Which makes what we did next a little ironic. Fast forward to the 1670s. A Dutch lens grinder named Antony van Leeuwenhoek points one of his homemade microscopes at a drop of water and sees, for the first time in history, the tiny living things swarming inside it. After hundreds of thousands of years of fighting an invisible enemy, humans finally saw it. And from that single moment of clarity comes everything: germ theory, antibiotics, vaccines, surgery, machines that look inside you without a single cut. Genuine miracles. If you showed them to almost anyone born before 1900, they'd assume you were a god. Diseases that erased whole villages, smallpox, cholera, became lines in a history book. That is not a small thing. That is the greatest winning streak our species has ever had. But progress is a trade, and we rarely read the receipt, because somewhere in the rush to defeat the disease, we got quietly worse at the older thing: the 7-minute appointment, the doctor typing into a screen instead of looking at your face. The strange modern experience of being thoroughly treated and barely seen at the same time. We finally cornered the enemy under glass, and somewhere in that victory, we forgot how to sit down. We cured the disease, and we kept misplacing the bedside. Which brings it back to you. So here's where all of this lands. The next time someone you love is sick and there's nothing to fix, no clever cure, no pill that helps, and you sit down beside them anyway and just stay, that's not nothing. That is the single oldest medical act there is. You are doing the exact thing a stranger did for a half-blind Neanderthal 45,000 years ago for reasons neither of you could put into words. 45,000 years of people refusing to let each other suffer alone. Iraq, Italy, Vietnam, a frozen mountain, an Egyptian scribe, your own living room. It's a chain. And right now, it's your turn in the chair. So let me ask you the question. This whole thing started with, who sat with you the last time you were really sick? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if you want to know what those same ancestors did when caring wasn't enough, when they picked up a stone tool and tried surgery, that video's right there. Go watch it.